Okay, everyone, here's going to be the last lecture of the semester, and this one's going to be on F. Scott Fitzgerald's decidedly great, The Great Gatsby. Boy, what's to say about Gatsby? Written, I believe I think it was published in 1925, in the Roaring Twenties, one of the great documents of the Roaring Twenties, probably the work of literature on that era. But I mean, to even look at it just from that standpoint is probably being a bit reductive. It just goes beyond that. And probably I wouldn't doubt if this is the most beloved of the American classics. Very few of my students did actually read it, don't like it. And it's sort of maybe the great work of art on the American dream, as well. There's been a lot made of that. There's a lot made of the obvious, some of the hand waving, even symbols in this, like Dr. G.J. Eichelberg and the green lights and those things. It's quite. I mean, it's a very. I think it's only 60,000 words. Not particularly difficult. They're one of the easier. It's not like trying to read through Moby Dick, or even Huck Finn for that matter. It's a breezy read. It can feel very light. It's a fascinating work when you really sort of. It can be read and reread. Holds up on a rereading extremely well. There's all kinds of interesting influences from this book. F. Scott Fitzgerald, for one thing, loved, Dashiell Hammett's The Maltese Falcon, and also trying to think of the other. Why am I blanking on this famous noir writer? I'll probably Raymond Chandler. How can I forget him? And Raymond Chandler's writing. Philip Marlowe, the detective, and these were these really stylistic noir writers he liked, and they didn't. I mean, those books are still being read today too, and there's a lot of arguments, a lot of ink spilled about what is and isn't literature. Listen, you wouldn't put even Chandler much, and I like him a lot, but you wouldn't necessarily put him with Twain's Huck Finn or Allison's Invisible Man or something. But it's much more layered writing than the typical foily covered paperback you'd find in the stores today, and they're fun. The kind of thing, the dame with the legs up to here, walking in, and the private eye. There's usually a bit of a dark view of capitalism kind of there, off and out in L.A., and these a lot of dark rooms in that sunny city and things. And anyway, a lot of bootleggers and things like that in these novels. And boy, does that influence kind of make it into Gatsby in such a fun way. This is the Roaring Twenties. And what we have here, and again, as far as the American, this I do believe this is about the American dreams, aspiration itself in some ways, and at the center of all this, you do get also before I go start down by the American dream sort of trope here. A lot of Marxist readings on this book that they can hold up. I mean, there's certainly the wealthy people do not come off, Buchanan's particularly either, but especially Tom maybe especially do not come off very well. Money itself, you can see Gatsby as being this just completely sort of false and created figure. But and it being sort of an anti-capitalist, this is a time again, a roaring 20s when the economy was again roaring and sort of at a great ascent, and all of this is about to come crashing down here in just a few years, and lead to the Great Depression. And I remember there's one great notation in the book where it's I think. Nick Carraway, who's sort of the Marlowe, the teller of the tale here, and he finds an old journal or something of Gatsby's, and anyway, the table he finds, or an old train table or something. It's July 5th, right? Not the 4th, the 5th, and the 4th is the party, the 5th is the cleanup, and there's definitely a sense where this is the party being told, but in retrospect, after a lot, maybe there's been quite a reckoning after this party, and just a wonderfully, gorgeously constructed novel. Maybe over constructed. You can make that argument. It doesn't bother me. But I mean, almost every I think there's 10 or 11 total chapters. Every chapter sort of around a kind of told around a part, some party, a small or large one, or a get together. And in this, we have Nick Carraway, who is the sort of Midwest, very, I mean, seated completely in the morality of the Midwest. And we get that opening where, basically Nick Carraway is, raised in on the sort of ethos and morality of don't think anyone's better than you and don't ever think you're better than anyone else. That explained, just grounded regular folk. That is where that is who's and that's where Nick Carraway comes from. That is who's telling this tale, and he ends up in New York and bearing witness and telling us the tale of all these sort of wild people and wild times. The first people we actually get introduced to are the Buchanans, and Tom Buchanan is a man, something of an aristocrat, right? His family has tons of money. He moves down into his state from New York with a stable of like thoroughbred horses. That's the kind of money this guy has. He'd be a billionaire in today's world. Buchanan, and he was born into it. He didn't earn it. He's married to the what's assumed to be the beautiful Daisy. Daisy Buchanan, and she's married to Tom. And I say assumed to be because we never do get whenever I ask this question in class, everyone thinks she's beautiful. But there is not one mention of her physical appearance anywhere. What we do get a lot of description of is her voice. And boy, that which is sort of low and husky. And as far as voices go, I think the perfect choice. Maybe would have been Scarlett Johansson would have been a perfect, I think, choice to have played Daisy, and that boy, her voice anyway would have been perfect. She's also happens to be a very beautiful woman. And Daisy, anyway, he calls her voice a deathless song. I mean, and that is, that the myths, the way one gains immortality in Greek mythology, and in the Greek world, in the Homeric epics, is to, do something great enough to get into the song. They don't believe in a heaven and hell, and behaving yourself, and you end up in this, on a cloud with God, with eternal bliss, right? In the old Greek world, and he was steeped in his classical literature. Fitzgerald was. So anyway, again in the Siren song, again the Sirens, famously in Greek literature, whose songs were so beautiful that they they were on an island and there was all kinds of jagged rocks around that island, and they would need to get closer and closer to them, and the sailors were countless sailors died trying to get closer look at those singers and to hear that beautiful song. So again, she is the siren of this novel, and what Daisy is a rich. She was also born into wealth. And the bit of a backstory where Gatsby, as a young soldier, fell in love. And Gatsby has quite a backstory, right? Born Jimmy Gatson. Oh, you cannot beat Fitzgerald for names, and just a wonderful invention. He was born James Gatz, called Jimmy by his father. So he went from Jimmy Gatz to changes his name to J. Gatsby, and boy, one sounds like a two-bit hood, or Jimmy Gatz sounds like a gangster out of a Cagney movie, right? And Jay Gatsby very much sounds like the aristocrat he's pretending to be. So it's just beautifully done. Pitch perfect, really, there by Fitzgerald. Anyway, born Jimmy Gatz to what were shiftless farmers, I think was the way Fitzgerald puts it. And some part of him, they even say, never even accepted them as his parents. What a line that is. And it tells us a lot. And this was a young man who, for whatever reason, was just had this drive in him, right? And boy, that is the American story, right? He's born to nothing, right? I mean, the great American dream is you need both parts, right? You need to be born in the log cabin and ascend the presidency of the United States, again, or captain of industry or fame and fortune some other way, or, whatever it is. Born into nothing and making yourself out of nothing into something extraordinary. That's at least one the version of the American. There's a couple of versions of the American Dream, but that's the one we're dealing with in this book. And but there, and Gatsby, does he meets a man named Dan Cody when he's just a teenager, saves him from drowning. A lot of water imagery in this book too. That's I think what is her name? I'm gonna look. Give me 1 second. Margaret. Why am I not finding this? Maureen Corrigan, sorry about that. I wrote and So We Read On, which is a terrific biography of the book, not of Fitzgerald, of Gatsby. Anyway, I want to give her credit. She was pointing this out there, but just how much water imagery. And again, Gatsby at the end of this will drown in a pool, right? We have that great foreshadow just before he meets Daisy, by the way, where it's raining outside. He's nervous meeting her, and he goes around. He leaves. He kind of panics and runs out. And Nick doesn't know where he is. Then there's a knock on the door. He goes to the front door. Like, there's Gatsby out there standing, hands plunged like weights into his pockets, standing in a puddle of water. And again, almost this eerie and beautiful, also sort of a primitive, a prelude to how what his fate at the end of this because of Daisy is going to be. But Gatsby, does rise himself up. Again, he meets Dan Cody as a teenager, learns everything about being a yacht, makes himself useful. A bit of a clinic on how to become a success, really, from Gatsby. And we get that table at the end, which I guess, a lot of people say kind of drain it. It's sort of like, there's also, throughout this novel, a kind of realism versus romanticism. And you've got the gorgeous, sumptuous poetry, especially of those party scenes, which I'll get back to in that last page, those last few pages, and versus a sort of a deconstructing sort of realism of much of the rest of the book. I mean, again, Tom Buchanan and Daisy are the beautiful people. In our world, maybe they'd be the Kardashians or something like, these uber wealthy people who are going to all, socialites going to all the great parties and meeting all the, the right people and living the high life. But boy, they really get deconstructed through this book, and and their ugly side just shows. They're shown to be kind of cowardly and even parasitic, I think. These are not shown to be very good people. Jordan Baker, who becomes Nick's love interest and is from that set as well, also very dishonest. And not someone who, doesn't also. It just comes off as it's just a general sort of shallow and kind of immoral person of not great substance and not very admirable. So all the way, kind of get, and Gatsby himself, right, who's the one who celebrated at the beginning. Kind of, it turns out he's just a front man for, Meyer Wolfsheim, this Jewish gangster, which I'll get to in a minute. But and so he too is sort of deconstructed. All his opulent wealth, comes from this like seedy, sort of a dishonest place. But I also think it would be hard pressed. You'd almost have to be, Arnold Weinstein puts it, a masochistic not to notice the gorgeous sumptuousness that money creates in this world too. There is, in this, a glamour and a gorgeousness and you can just see that all the poetry comes out in the lives and the highlights of the moneyed people and as well. So that is every bit as real. And not only that, I think that's actually the more the most alive parts of the book are there. So that has to be, so I don't think this is certainly not just I don't think Marx is reading anyway, let's put it that way, that this is somehow anti-capitalist or showing that money just corrupts. That it's in there, but that's not the only thing that's in there. Anyway, there's all kinds of. It's a very gorgeously allegorical book, right? Gatsby himself is a man. He does, unlike the rest of the rich people here. He is self-created, and he imagines, again, literally changes his name and imagines himself into this sort of aristocrat and kind of pulls it off by he can't get, and again, he never quite gets there, right? He never quite gets accepted by the old money, in this book. He's on the other side. There's two eggs in Long Island. He's got them mixed up, and I think he's in East Egg, which is the less fashionable. I'm sorry, I forgot that wrong. He's in the least fashionable of the two eggs, and he buys this huge house, and looking straight across the bay, he can see this green light, and the green light is at the end of Daisy's dock. So, I mean, he moved there to be next to her, and he throws and again, this is a time when a lot of people are throwing parties. The Roaring Twenties, and nobody throws a better party than Gatsby. Everybody wants to go, and again, it really is a sort of, these parties are a kind of a work of art, really. And famously, and before we get to that party though, too, right? We first get Nick, who will meet Tom's mistress, somewhat involuntarily. Tom kind of thinks nothing of dragging people into his messes, an utterly selfish human being, and he meets Myrtle, who is sort of the cruder, maybe somewhat of a debased version of Daisy in this, right? Where Daisy's the siren song and the gorgeous voice and all glamour and somewhat ghostly figure, but also again, you assume to be beautiful, even though we don't get a physical description. And then we get Myrtle, who's a poor woman. She lives in the Valley of Ashes. The Valley of Ashes is between Manhattan and where they live on Long Island. It seems to be the place where a lot of the coal is stored. It's almost like where all the refuse goes from Manhattan and from the richer world of Long Island. It's described as this hills of charcoal and ash, and all the men in it are sort of stained black. And above it all, we get the eyes of T.J. Eckleburg, right? Who it's an old billboard of an oculist who's long since gone. But like the eyes of God seems to be watching over the Valley of Ashes, and Myrtle lives there, who is Tom's mistress, and she lives there in a garage with her husband. Her husband runs a garage, and she's just living this sort of depressed life. But Myrtle is a extremely sexualized and voluptuous woman, and it seemed like all the nerves beneath her dress were smoldering beneath her dress. You get these beautiful sort of visions in this, the vitality beneath this dress as she goes. But again, she's a little obvious about it. I had a student once claim that, and one on a paper I thought it was pretty clever, that Beyonce was sort of like Daisy and Kim Kardashian. It was sort of like Myrtle, and that kind of makes it works a little bit, maybe a bit inexact. But anyway, Nick, along with Tom, picks up Myrtle. They go out for the day. They have a party, and it's just, they rent a room against 1920. There's no air conditioning in these rooms. It's too hot. Nick he keeps trying to get away. He can't get away. He's not having fun. He doesn't like being there. He likes Daisy. He doesn't really feel like bearing witness to Tom and his mistress, who disappeared into a room, obviously having carnal relations in that room. And then later, everyone's drinking a little too much. A lot of dishonesty and phoniness. I'm in the artistic game, says one guy. And again, an artist a real artist doesn't speak that way, right? Everyone's sort of, and you do get everyone wanting to be somebody else. You have a lot of kind of costuming going on among these people, which is kind of interesting. But it's all done in a kind of obvious and self-centered, and it's just kind of an ugly way, and an ugly apartment, and what turned out to be a very ugly party, which ends, by the way, with Myrtle, saying Daisy. He's telling her not to mention his wife's name. Daisy, Dad. Boom! Cracks her in the face, breaks her nose, and we get a woman on the on the floor and a bunch of bloody towels, and that's how that sort of party ends, right? The very next chapter set off, obviously, just foiling right off that is chapter 3. We get the famous opening There was music from my house through the summer nights, and his blue gardens men and girls came and went like moths among them, the whispering and the champagne and the stars. Just a perfect fucking sense. And later, throughout them, and you just get this beautiful description of this sumptuous party, and you get all kinds of, blue gardens and the green grass and the cataracts of foam, out on the Long Island Sound where people are water skiing, and it's dusk, and you get the murmur, the beautiful soft murmur of the chit chat of the party, and the cocktails seem to float on trays, out of the dusk at you, and everything is just gorgeous and poetic. And this is going to be Gatsby's party, and our introduction to him, and our introduction is you get multiple origins, almost like a mythic figure, or in our modern times, like you see the greatest of these Marvel superhero, are always the origin story, right? But he has multiple origins, and again, these are the wealthy set. These are the people everyone else is talking about. And boy, they're all talking about Gatsby, right? And heard he killed the guy once, nephew to the Kaiser. All these crazy that he's a bootlegger. That one ended up being true, but there's all these sorts of stories, and he's sort of overhearing all this. Eventually, he does. He meets, and of course, Nick. His house is next door to Gatsby. That's how he ends up over there, and he lives in just this modest, tiny little place. With Gatsby's enormous kind of mansion overlooking it. And as we will find out, Gatsby does all this for romantic reasons, for love. He is still in love, and again, back then when he was a soldier, he ended up a soldier in the war. Apparently, comported himself quite well in the war and did well. But again, he has all these kind of. He's got a medal from Monte Cristo, so that's something he did in the war that Nick does not believe. Claims he's an Oxford man. It'll turn out that he just did like a 6-month, a 1 semester sort of thing he did there that they were offering to U.S. soldiers, so he wasn't really an Oxford fan, but he went there just long enough so you can sort of say it, and he's glommed and pitched and scratched. Again, those times he on the boat with Dan Cody, he learned how to speak with the the overstated elocution, of sort of rich, but they kind of talk with the Joes saying, he learned how to speak, he learned how to, what to find, a good cigar from a bad cigar, and how to pick wines, and all those sorts of things, which fork is the salad fork, all these sort of protocol and accoutrements of wearing wealth that he learned. He ended up he didn't make any money then, but so he left there, ended up with gangsters, and he bought this the mansion. But back when he was a soldier, he was in love with a woman named Daisy, and a rich girl in Kentucky, and it wasn't just the girl he was in love with. He was in love with her whole life. She was from Louisville. She was among the very moneyed set from that town. And he just walked into that house she had, and the big front porch and the mid juleps and all that stuff, and was just like, that is exactly how he'd always saw himself. She had the life he thought he was convinced in his head he was supposed to have. So he fell in love with not just the girl but the whole life, but the girl was a big part of it, and he thought of himself as a prince. That was his princess, and it had to be her. He wasn't gonna settle for anyone else. He buys the castle, in the form of that mansion on Long Island to try to get his princess back. She's now been married to the uber wealthy Tom Buchanan. Isn't going to dissuade him at all. And he throws all these huge parties, right, with everyone who goes to him, trying to draw in the love he lost like a moth to a flame, right? It's just beautiful, poetic storytelling here, just perfect allegory. Anyway, Nick, is amazed, by the party, by him. We end up, meeting some eccentric people like the Allies and the library, and who has there's this one guy, one of the few guys who comes off well in this entire book. He's only in it twice. He's one guy who shows up at Gatsby's funeral, and he's in the library and he's drunk. I've been drunk for days, and again, a lot of people partying way too much. The party's been going on a little too long. America has been partying for a little bit too long. It's about to have the stock market crash and then the Great Depression. It's about to pay the price for its reckless behavior. And there's all manner of recklessness. The way people drive in this book is a big thing. And the wealthy people, again, these rich, Jordan, Gatsby himself, they drive like fucking maniacs. I do think that the Baz Luhrmann, I hope I said his name right, the director, came out with the film a few years back, which had some look, some of that was cheap and silly and even stupid. I don't know how you put Jay-Z music in a book about Gatsby, which takes place in the 20s, but and I thought the party scene was terrible. But the Valley of Ashes, I thought it was pitch perfect, and I thought the driving and the crazy driving, he sort of was perfect, pitch perfect in that as well. I also thought DiCaprio, who I didn't know would be a great Gatsby, great as that role, was good. Anyway, Allies in the library is sitting there with the books, and he says, they're real. You know that? They're absolutely real. Because I thought if it put... And then somebody goes to take one off the bookshelves, and again, saying they're surprised they're real as if... so there's something phony and constructed about Gatsby, and that is going to be very true. He's like, careful, if you take one of those books off, the whole room's about to might collapse in on itself or something. But again, a very insightful sort of comment. And that guy, the guy in the library is a bit drunk, but he's also very insightful and smart. Anyway, as it turns out, he's trying to get to know Daisy. It turns out Nick is also her cousin. And Jordan, Gatsby, through Jordan, ends up asking Nick to have her to tea. And, when they do meet after 5 years, it's like, love all over again. Daisy is not happy in her marriage to Tom at all. After a rough start, they do sort of hit it back off again. And at the end, though, and again, that was all, the love for her. Even if it wasn't really for her, it was who he, and again, he's really in love with who he imagines Daisy to be, not who she really is. I don't know if that makes it much less beautiful, at least the love itself, or the pursuit itself. Now, once he actually attains his goal, and that happens fairly often, the pursuit of the goal is so much better than once you actually get it, when you get this sort of letdown. And boy, there's a hint of that at the end when Nick is leaving, and he says... And they're sort of cuddling sort of cuddled up in the corner, staring into each other's eyes, and he's like, almost 5 years. There must have been moments even that afternoon when Daisy tumbled short of his dreams, not through her own fault, but because of the colossal vitality of his illusion. It had gone beyond her, beyond everything. He'd thrown himself into it with a creative passion, adding to it all the time, decking it out with every bright feather that drifted his way. No amount of fire or freshness can challenge what a man will store up in his ghostly heart. Just a sort of a remarkable passage. And later we will get a sort of flashback to when he and Daisy did meet back then, and when it really was perfect. And he walks out, and I guess this is going to be the first night he ever kissed her. And it's about as perfect a romantic, poetic romantic writing as you're ever going to get. And his heart beat faster and faster as Daisy's white face came up to his own. He knew that when he kissed this girl and forever wed his unutterable vision to her perishable breath, his mind would never romp again like the mind of God. So he waited, listening for a moment longer to the tuning fork that had been struck upon a star. Then he kissed her. At his lips' touch, she blossomed for him like a flower, and the incarnation was complete. It's as good as, again, from a love scene as you will ever get. And that one line especially, he knew that once he kissed this girl and forever wed his unutterable vision to her perishable breath, his mind would never romp again like the mind of God. And boy, that is true. The best part of any planned thing is the planning itself, right? The greatest part of desire is the desiring itself, because our imaginations can always outrun corporeal reality. The thing can never be what we imagine it as, and he will then spend 5 years dreaming and redreaming this girl, and she's not who he thinks she is. But that, it is impossible, though, not to root for Gatsby and to feel the tragedy in his demise. And we do get that showdown. Another party. This one's they're all just sort of getting together. They end up in a room at the Plaza in New York. It's too hot. Gatsby is now planning on telling that Daisy, he thinks is going to be going on with this. I think she's told him she would. And it's the big showdown. Almost that OK Corral here between Tom and Gatsby. And he says, Tom finally confronts him. He knows something's going on. What kind of a row you trying to cause? And by the way, on their way out there, Myrtle has seen Tom and Nick, Tom especially, in Gatsby's car. They're going to switch cars. It'll be Gatsby driving his own car on the way home, and that's going to come back because Myrtle will come back out into the road thinking it's Tom, run out in front of the car because her husband's locked her in the house and is about to move her across the country because he doesn't know who she's seeing, but he knows she's seeing someone, and tragically gets hit by it's Daisy driving, and Gatsby will take the blame and take the fall for it and pay for it with his life, as Myrtle's husband's going to shoot him dead thinking he's the one who ran her over. But in that hotel room, as they have their confrontation, he's like, tell her. She has to tell Tom that she never loved him. Not just that she doesn't love him now. That's not good enough. Again, he wants to go back and completely erase the past, and so that rejection, because he was deemed not good enough because he was poor for Daisy. She had to marry a man of means, and he was not back then. So he's made himself into one now. But again, that wasn't enough for him. He has to just change the past itself, and we do get a sense of his pathos when Nick says to him, don't expect too much of it or you can't change the past. And Gatsby is incredulous. He says, well, of course you can. Which is a crazy thing to say. But anyway, it doesn't go Gatsby's way. She panics. And she's like, you want too much. I did love Tom once, but I loved you too. Boy, Gatsby, you could just almost hear his heart breaking. And he's like, you love me too? And then that's when they take off. They end up, Myrtle ends up getting killed. And, we are heading toward our tragic ending. And eventually, Tom figures out a way to get for Wilson to think it was Gatsby, and it was Gatsby's car, but it was actually Daisy driving, and Gatsby he would do anything for Daisy, more than willing, to take the blame for any, when he pays for it with his life, and he's sitting there, and floating in that pool, and just realizing that, and he's got the phone out there in case Daisy calls, and as he's sitting there floating by himself in that pool had been so filled with revelers all summer. Now it's all over, and and it's just kind of watching over him and sort of already realizing it's failed, then the ashen figure comes through and shoots him, but he ends up drowning. Shot to death and drowning. In his pool. There's then a funeral they called for Gatsby, and after all the crowds that came to his parties that summer, no one. It shows up at the funeral. Only that one guy from the library, with the owl glasses. And again, we've got the owl eyes glasses. We've got the T.J. Uckelberg. There is a lot of sort of imagery of certain sight, and that most people are kind of wandering through this world sort of blind. But again, in the end, the last party was this attempt at the funeral, which ends up being a very sad and sort of depressing failure. And at the end, you do get Nick. These last 5-6 pages are probably as gorgeous an articulation of the promise of America, as you will ever find anywhere, man. It ends here in these. I won't go all. I'm not going to go all the way to the end, but. These famous, as Nick is sitting there looking across the bay, and again you got the green lines, right? The green significant of money, of fertility, and it is the light at the end of Daisy's dock that Gatsby could see from it. Which is why he bought that mansion there. Right, trying to bring her to him. Most of the big shore places were closed now, and there were hardly any lights except the shadowy moving glow of a ferry boat across the sound. And as the moon rose higher, the inessential houses began to melt away until gradually I became aware of the old island here that flowered once for Dutch sailors' eyes. a fresh green breast of the New World. Its vanished trees, the trees that had made way for Gatsby's house, had once pandered in whispers to the last and greatest of human dreams. For a transitory enchanted moment, man must have held his breath in the presence of this continent, compelled into an aesthetic contemplation he neither understood nor desired, face to face, for the last time in history, with something commensurate to his capacity for wonder. Just it really doesn't. The writing just doesn't get much better than that. And what a finish! And what a book here. Great Gatsby. That's Gatsby.